Chapter 26 Temple of Dawn. His determination renewed, Requiem was keen to push on. "OK, who's going to drive?" he asked eagerly, rubbing his hands together as he looked around at his friends with all the excitement of a child about to open his presents. "Neither of you two, that's for sure," answered Kyo, killing any fleeting hopes that either Requiem or Freya had of taking the wheel. However, Kyo knew that his own driving prowess left a lot to be desired, due to the fact that his knees always hit the steering wheel. Left with no choice, he turned to the one member of the group whose gait shunned technology and hoped it meant that, if by chance, Urasil did know how to drive, he would do it slowly and cautiously. "Urasil, fancy taking us for a spin?" he asked, trying to hide his hesitation. "Don't mind if I do," replied Urasil with a smile. He rolled up his sleeves and merrily donned a pair of driving gloves and goggles before striding confidently to the driver's seat. Freya and Requiem simply looked at each other and shrugged as they followed Urasil and Gio to the beast. Do we think a performance car is going to cope with dense forest?" asked Urasil as he was about to leave. "Fair point. Hang on a minute." Requiem put his hands on the door and roof of the car. The front left veered up violently, followed by the back right. Their heads clashed together as the beast rose jerkily into the sky. When their heads had stopped spinning, they found themselves in the same car, but now on huge suspension with massive tyres of monster truck proportions. As Urasil peered out of his window to gauge just how far from the ground they were, Requiem nudged him in the ribs and whispered gleefully, "Oh, and I've beefed up the engine a little more. You can never have too much power." Urasil was about to engage a gear when sense overtook him once again. What? What is it with you and asked an exasperated Gio as he flung his hands up in the air. "Well, do you know where we're going?" asked Urasil as he turned to stare at Gio. Crossing his arms and looking out of his window as he slumped in his seat, Gio muttered reluctantly, "No, just enough with the ums." "We could sit here until nightfall and then look for the bright spot," said Freya, trying to dispel the silence that had filled the car. Requiem stuck his head and arm out of the window. "We don't need to wait," he said darkly. With the lowering of his outstretched hand, day turned to night, and they were plunged into darkness. The only light came from the beast's unnaturally bright headlights, and "There!" pointed Gio, who had leapt out of his sulk at the sight of the light. "Off to the right of the hill." Settling himself in his seat, Urasil gauged his quarry. "I see it, about midway. Tally-ho!" Urasil finally put the pedal to the metal. The beast reared up on its hind wheels and shot into the forest. Its occupants bumped around on the soft suspension as the beast made short work of any trees Urasil thrust in its way. In a wobbly voice, Urasil called, "I can't see the light anymore." Requiem was sitting casually with his arms folded behind his head and his feet on the dashboard. Gesturing to a switch near Urasil, he said, "Turn off your lights." "What?" said Urasil, looking most distraught at the idea. "Are you mad?" "He has a point, Urasil," said Gio jerkily. "These lights are too bright. We won't be able to see the distant light of the Temple of Dawn. I wouldn't worry. We're pretty much guaranteed that anything you drive into, the beast is going to devour." Urasil took a deep breath to steel himself before agreeing to such an absurd idea. "OK, but just so we're all clear, I don't like this one bit." Urasil turned off the lights and hurtled blindly into the darkness. In the distance, a faint light could just be seen. Urasil mowed down trees like they were twigs as he blazed a trail towards it. The problem was that Urasil was literally blazing a trail. The flames from the exhausts were setting the fallen trees alight. It was not long until they were running from a voracious forest fire. Gio was beginning to find the heat behind him a little too warm, and he wafted his shirt. "You know, I'm not sure that slashing and burning the forest this guy lives in is conducive to getting him to help us." They all looked at one another, sweat pouring from their faces. Gio had a very good point, but there was nothing they could do. The fire was in full flourish, and they were about to reach the light. As the beast broke through the last of the trees, they entered a tranquil garden bathed in golden light. The serenity of gently trickling fountains, wafting willows, and bees busying themselves about the flowers was utterly shattered by the roar and the crunching of the well-manicured bushes and classic statues under wheel. Uracil slammed on the brakes and slid to a halt. They all jumped out and hurried to the hole they had made. They quickly put the energy they had stored from Despair's tunnels to good use. Gio, Uracil and Freya put the fires out, and Requiem repaired the forest. Clapping his hands together and turning back from the opening, Requiem said, "There, no one would ever know." "Except for the deep skid marks in this beautiful lawn and the smashed fountain, you mean?" asked Freya sarcastically as she pointed to the devastation. Requiem whistled and sauntered innocently over to the beast, shrinking it back down to a sports car and turning the engine off. By the time he had shut its door, the garden was its tranquil and beautiful self once more. "Like I said, no one would ever know." The group meandered through a garden that seemed to draw inspiration from every part of the world. They soon forgot their worries and their woes. For just a brief moment, they could even forget why they were there, as the stresses of life flowed away with the water in the garden's many fountains and streams. They turned a corner formed of large manicured trees and came face to face with a simple, yet beautiful, Japanese temple. The doors were open, and brightly coloured birds fluttered by as they walked towards its welcoming threshold. They entered with a feeling of optimism and a smile. The doors closed quietly behind them, but none of them worried. They took off their shoes to walk on the polished wood flooring. It wasn't just Gio who was admiring the Japanese lanterns and oriental artwork as they breathed in the smell of well-oiled wood. They were all quite taken with the temple. When their collective guard was at its lowest, the natural light pouring in from windows high above them was suddenly extinguished by the slamming of shutters, leaving only the flickering orange light of the lanterns. They now found themselves in a room with no passageways and no disturbing features. Simply a black box with wooden pillars and a dimly lit floor. They couldn't even see the walls or ceiling for the darkness. Hello?" called Gio. No reply was forthcoming. Uracil made exaggerated steps backwards as he started to return to the door. "Perhaps this is the wrong place. Maybe we should leave." They all deferred to Uracil's wisdom on the matter and followed him closely as he span around and ran back towards the entrance, only to end up back in the middle of the square. "Hang on a minute," said Gio. He strode off in a different direction, only to reappear behind them. "Okay, so we're trapped," muttered Requiem, clearly angry at being caught out so easily. Freya bounced on her heels, at a loss but unafraid. "Anyone got any ideas?" "Yep, smash our way out," Gio said eagerly as he made his way to a pillar. "Wait." Requiem held out a hand towards Gio. "There has to be another way." Uracil looked at the lanterns and noticed they had Japanese kanji written on them. "Oh, if only I could read Japanese." Gio walked behind Uracil, folded his arms and looked down at the lantern. "I can. This one says north." Freya looked on in amazement. "Will wonders never cease?" Requiem gestured over to the remaining lanterns. "And the others?" "Would you believe me if I said that the 4 lanterns alight in this room each have written on them a point of the compass?" "If I had a choice, I'd say no," replied Uracil, loath ever to accept that Gio knew something he didn't. "But as that's the best we've got right now, does anyone have a compass? Perhaps we have to arrange these lanterns to face the directions of their namesakes." Gio went to grab the west lantern. "I'm sure west is over here." As he did so, it burst into flames, shooting Gio back across the room and forcing him to drop the lantern on the floor. Getting up and blowing cold air on his singed fingers, Gio's world slowly came back into focus. Freya was pointing at the fallen lantern. Look, it stopped burning violently, but even though it's on its side, the light hasn't gone out, and it hasn't set the floor alight either. Turning to Gio with a look of disbelief, Freya asked, And what makes you think you know where west is exactly, in a room with no windows and no compass? Have some way of detecting the Earth's magnetic field, do we? No need to answer. We know that we just witnessed an act of sheer stupidity. Gio opened his mouth to defend his actions, but Urasil interjected. Can I make a radical suggestion? How about we only pick up the lanterns of the gates we come from? Good plan, said Requiem thoughtfully, as he finally turned back to face the group. He had been staring into the darkness, trying to see if he could make out any energy signals, fearing this may be a Darkstalker trap. Looking at the abashed Gio, Requiem threw him a lifeline. Gio, can you tell us which is which? Once each of them were standing next to their respective lanterns, Gio looked at his tentatively, still feeling the burn on his fingers as he waved them in the air. So, who wants to pick up first? He asked. We'll all go together, said Freya, hoping that Urasil's hunch would pay off. On 3. 1, 2, 3. On the count of 3, each of them grabbed their lantern and held it at arm's length. Fire spewed instantly from each, but, this time, not at the person holding it, but towards the centre of the room. When the flames died down, they revealed a 5th lantern, also with writing on it. Requiem was hesitant to get near it. He stood with his hands in his pockets and cocked his head towards Gio. What does it say, Gio? 5th. Looking at Requiem, Gio asked, Want me to pick it up? No, let me. Requiem walked over to the 5th lantern and stared at it. For a moment, the flame inside looked like a tiny cartoon demon diving manically at the surface of the lantern, as if trying to break free. Requiem gritted his teeth, grabbed it with one arm and held it aloft. Fireworks erupted from the lantern. Requiem shielded his eyes as the rest retreated to the safety of the pillars. Once the popping and whizzing had ceased, Requiem slowly uncovered his eyes. The lantern in his hand had gone, replaced by a man sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by the other 4 lanterns and varying religious artifacts, flowers and musical instruments. The man looked at Requiem from behind a white mask that covered the left side of his face. Requiem looked back blankly. He did not know what to make of it all. Despair truly lived up to his name and was the embodiment of dark causes, but Inspiration looked a bit like an eccentric conductor. His brilliant purple and gold robe covered a neatly pressed, crisp white shirt, black trousers, cummerbund, and highly polished shoes. Hello, said the man in a gentle and approachable voice. Why do you seek inspiration? Hearing his voice, the rest of the group emerged from behind the pillars. Do we take it that you are inspiration? Asked Requiem with some suspicion. That depends, replied the man, unoffended. Inspiration is unique to the person who seeks it, is it not? Whilst pondering whether or not this was the person they had been seeking, Urasil noticed a baton sitting on the floor in front of him. Do you conduct? He asked, picking up the baton to run his fingers along it. The man continued to speak in gentle tones. Music is my forte. Do you play? Urasil had a glint in his eye that the others knew well. Oh yes, I belong to the Musicians' Guild. Requiem brought me this fine set of bongos. He proceeded to give them away, but I got myself another pair. Would you like a quick rendition? He garbled in excitement. The other 3 members of the group shouted, No! In perfect unison. Shame. Did you play for Despair? If it's so bad that none of your friends can bear to listen to it, I'm sure he would have found it quite entertaining. I think we entertained him enough, said Freya dryly. You know him then? The man remained seated as he turned to look at Freya. Yes, we have a lot in common, you see. Like what? A liking for the fires of hell and a thirst for power? asked Gio sarcastically, before clamping his hands over his mouth to silence himself. No, chains, interjected Requiem. Up until this point, the man had betrayed little emotion, but, at this, his eyes behind his white mask widened. Ah, so you can see them. Then you must be fated for the fifth gate. Requiem was reserved in his reply. I have an interest in it, but tell me, why do you have chains? The man's gentle voice gained new depth as he answered. Despair seeks fortune's throne, and, if he was to sit at it, well, the ramifications would be grave indeed. His chains are for the sake of tomorrow. My chains are not for tomorrow, but for today and my own well-being. Freya just looked confused. How does that work? I can open the fifth gate. If I were free to roam, I could be forced to open it by those who do not deserve to do so. Being incarcerated means that only those with the appropriate power can free me and, hence, open the gate. Requiem was intrigued. This man must be the inspiration they were seeking, and he had provided the glimmer of hope they needed. So, how often has this gate been opened then? I take it that it isn't a place of banishment if only a select few can open it. Since the mass exodus at its inception, a mere handful of people have opened the gate. Whether it is a place of banishment or not is something I cannot tell you. Freya folded her arms in contempt. This whole thing just gets more contrived as we go along. Why don't we just forget the gate, Requiem, and go home? Inspiration looked around the room and smiled. That is, of course, an option you all have. Tell me, said Gio quizzically, do you like being the only one who can open the gate? Are the chains worth it? Inspiration smiled. This arrangement has allowed me to become the oldest member of the Four Gates and its satellite nations. I have a beautiful and expansive home and grounds. On occasions, along with all my usual visitors, I get to meet very special people, like Requiem here. So altogether, it's not bad. Well, as long as you're happy, I suppose, finished Gio airily. Thank you, I am. Inspiration nodded. Turning to Requiem, he continued. The question is, will you be happy, Requiem, to stop now? Requiem didn't even need to think about the answer. No. Finally, Inspiration told Requiem what he needed to hear. All you need do is release me and take me to the fifth gate. I will open it for you, and, after that, I guarantee nothing. Do you understand? Consumed by 1,000 thoughts and fighting 1,000 mental battles, Requiem nodded slowly. I do.